You'll often hear trainers and various other boxing people say that boxing is 20% physical and 80% mental. Now, these are arbitrary figures, obviously, but the point is well taken. Psychology plays a massive part in boxing. But what is the psychological dynamic in this fight between Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois? Who has the upper hand going in? Who's going to deal with the pressure of the event better? And who will do a better job of holding it together psychologically if and when things get rough for them? Well, both guys are coming in off a run of form. AJ's won his last 4 and Dubois has won his last 2. But I think most people would agree that Dubois has beat the better opposition lately. He took the unbeaten records of Jarrell Miller and Filip Hrgović, and he overcame some psychological obstacles in those fights. Because Miller is a big bully type character, literally the polar opposite of Daniel Dubois, who's an introvert. And Miller was really mocking Dubois in the run-up to the fight. But at no point did Dubois appear to be triggered. He took it all in his stride and laughed it off, which I thought was quite interesting. You know, I kind of speculated half-jokingly that Dubois recently getting a girlfriend, apparently for the first time in his life, may have actually given him a confidence boost. Yes, even in his boxing. Sometimes when a guy loses his V, the world changes for him. Again, I said it half jokingly, but you never know. Maybe it really did give him a boost. In any event, he goes into the Miller fight against the big bad bully, the introvert versus the extrovert, the shy guy going up against the brash alpha, and Miller really put him under pressure in the ring. Physical pressure and mental pressure. And this is a guy in Daniel Dubois who just quit in his previous fight against Usyk, who'd also quit a couple of years earlier against Joe Joyce. You'd be forgiven for thinking after 3 or 4 rounds that Miller might make him quit at some point as well, because as I say, the pressure was a lot. But Dubois with his dad at ringside there, and I think he relies on his dad, by the way, for psychological comfort. He needs to hear his dad's voice. It makes him far more confident, I think. It reassures him when he can hear his dad's voice and see his face. Dubois in many ways, and I'm not trying to sound disrespectful here, but he still has the psychology somewhat of a little boy, like a child. And a lot of little boys, when they're having their early amateur bouts, when they're only very young, they'll fight much more bravely if their dad's there, if they can hear his voice. And so I think that's what Dubois is like as well. And that helped him overcome the big bad bully in Jarrell Miller. It would have given him a massive confidence boost, overcoming that physical and psychological obstacle, going up against someone who's so brash and cocky and alpha and doing a job on him. Then he goes into the Hrgović fight, a guy who apparently bashed Dubois up in sparring back in the days. And Hrgović was really leaning into that going into the fight. So it was yet another psychological barrier for Daniel Dubois to overcome. The memory of what had happened in that sparring session. Hrgović was very condescending towards Dubois, very dismissive, and he fought that way in the first couple rounds. He tried to bully Dubois in there, thought he was going to stop him early, threw everything at him, including the kitchen sink. But once again, Dubois stood firm. He didn't crack physically nor mentally, up against another alpha male type, and he beat the fight out of him. So going into this fight with AJ, in my estimation, Daniel Dubois is 110% confident. I don't think there's any doubts in his mind whatsoever. I truly believe that he thinks he's got more than enough to overcome anything AJ throws at him, any obstacle AJ puts in his way. Now, Anthony Joshua was clearly lacking in confidence against Jermaine Franklin and Robert Helenius. He looked scared to death in there, terrified of being hit. But then he hooked up with Ben Davison and he fought someone he was very familiar with in Otto Wallin. They'd sparred many rounds together in the gym. And according to Richie Woodall, AJ nearly always got the better of it, to such an extent that Woodall thought that AJ was actually holding back during certain sessions and carrying Otto Wallin during the spars, basically, just to get the rounds in. And so it's not really surprising then that AJ fought Otto Wallin in their pro bout with a lot of confidence. Stopped him in 5 rounds, the same man who went 12 with Fury. And Fury never came close to stopping Otto Wallin. And Wallin, by the way, was coming off a good win over Murat Gassiev when he fought AJ. So despite the familiarity that AJ had with Wallin, the victory still would have given him a confidence boost. Going into the Ngannou fight, it was another opponent who just recently had given Tyson Fury trouble. Dropped him. AJ went in there very switched on, looking to commit to his punches, particularly his counters. He had a game plan, he had a strategy. And at the end of the day, despite Ngannou having a lot of success against Tyson Fury, he was still a novice. And that would have given AJ a certain amount of confidence going in, knowing that this guy makes glaring mistakes. I mean, I could see it. You could drive a bus through Francis Ngannou's guard. It's that wide open. And I said all along that that would be a massive problem for Ngannou against AJ. You just can't have such a wide guard. Not when you're that sloppy as well. And so AJ went in there, dropped him 3 times, knocked him out cold. Something Tyson Fury never even came close to doing. Never came close to dropping Ngannou, never mind knocking him out cold. That would have given AJ even more of a confidence boost. Because in his head, he's thinking, wow, I must hit way harder than Tyson Fury then. Now, AJ and Dubois have sparred each other in the past. Dubois claimed that he hurt AJ in sparring, and AJ never denied it. But that was on one occasion. We don't know who got the better of things in all the other spars they had, or at least I don't. I haven't heard. But what I do know is they used to spar at Team GB. AJ was a pro at the time, obviously, and I think Dubois was as well, but still they used to train and spar over there in Sheffield. And essentially, most of those young British fighters, amateurs and pros, used to look up to AJ in that Sheffield gym. He was the man round there. The younger fighters saw him as like a big brother type figure, and he saw them as little brothers, including Daniel Dubois. Now, one of the things about human psychology is that people tend to fear the unknown, or fear what they don't understand. When Anthony Joshua lost to Andy Ruiz, when he got caught and dropped in that 3rd round, he was like a deer caught in the headlights of a car. You could see it on his face. He was like a fish out of water. He was in an unfamiliar environment against an unfamiliar fighter, totally out of his comfort zone, and he didn't cope particularly well. He was also fighting someone who was a similar age to himself. With Daniel Dubois, he's fighting someone he is very familiar with, having shared the ring with him, in sparring many times over the years, trained alongside him, looking at Dubois as like a little brother who he kind of pats on the head and gives advice to. And also, and this is perhaps even more important, AJ has seen Daniel Dubois quit in 2 fights. So he knows Dubois can be broken psychologically. He's seen it happen. Joyce did it to him, and Usyk did it to him. And surely AJ must be thinking, well, I went 24 rounds with Usyk and I never quit, yet this guy quit. And so if AJ does find himself in trouble in the fight, let's say he gets caught and hurt or dropped, he might not necessarily panic the way he did against Andy Ruiz and look like such a fish out of water. He might be thinking, I've still got this in hand. Dubois put Usyk down, yet he's still quitting the fight a couple rounds later. He's just my little bro, this guy. I know who he is. Wembley is my home. I've won here many times. He's the one who's a fish out of water. Yeah, he's had his little moment. No big deal. I've been here before. Climbed off the canvas to beat Klitschko. I suspect, as long as AJ's still fresh, if he gets hurt or dropped in the fight, that he may react in a more positive way than we've seen before because of the psychological dynamic at play here. It's different to the psychology of the Klitschko fight, where AJ was the little brother in that scenario. And in fact, that's a good fight to use as an example as well, because Vladimir Klitschko, on several occasions previously, had fallen apart psychologically when somebody stuck it on him. That's what happened against Ross Purity. That's what happened against Corey Sanders. That's what happened against Lamont Brewster in their first fight. But when he fought Anthony Joshua, a guy who he saw as a little brother, somebody he pats on the head and gives advice to, when AJ dropped him, Klitschko actually dealt with it a lot better than he dealt with being dropped earlier on in his career. And for me, it's because the psychological dynamic was different. He felt like he knew AJ, knew who he was. Any of you who have got brothers, right? Little brothers. If you get into a fight with your little brother and he catches you with a good shot and drops you, you're probably not going to be as concerned or worried about being dropped by your little brother as you would be getting dropped by a stranger. Because again, you know who your little brother is. You know him inside out. You know his strengths and weaknesses. You've seen him at his weakest moments. Whereas with a stranger, you don't know all those things necessarily. So there's that fear of the unknown. Now, with all this being said, if AJ gets tired in the fight, if he gasses out, then I don't think the big brother, little brother psychological dynamic is going to help him much. But to reiterate what I said earlier, if AJ gets hurt or dropped when he's still relatively fresh, I suspect he'll be able to cope with it fairly well. I could be wrong, but I think he'll be able to cope with it fairly well from a psychological perspective. Technically, we don't know. As far as will AJ be able to effectively wrap Dubois up or move around to clear his head, that remains to be seen. But psychologically, if he's fresh and gets hurt or dropped, I think he'll hold it together mentally. Anyway, that's my take on the psychological dynamics of this fight. If you want to hear me talk about the technical stuff, then check out this film study I've done on my Patreon page, where I analyze actual fight footage and point out the strengths and weaknesses of both guys, pluses and minuses, different habits and traits that they both have, and discuss which strategy is best for each guy to use. If you want to access this video along with hundreds of hours worth of other exclusive boxing content, as well as our members chat, just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called the Boxing Brotherhood. There's no contract, no commitment. You can cancel at any time, just like Netflix, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper. Just download the app from the Play Store or the App Store. All the links are in the description box below.